So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the first session of CMES Tunisia summer book discussions. I believe Mediterranean summers and books in general, and history books in particular, are one of the most enjoyable matching pairs in life. This is where the idea of organizing book discussions in the middle of July, whilst everyone else is swimming in Tunisia, comes from. And I'm glad, we were wondering if the idea would be like shareable, and there you are, you're here. So thank you very much for coming. It's today a pleasure and honor to present Professor Sophie Bessis. Sophie Bessis is a historian, journalist, researcher, and author. She has written extensively on political economy and women in the Maghreb and the Arab world. She is currently a research associate at the Institute for International and Strategic Relations, IRIS, in Paris. She's also Deputy Secretary General of the International...
I was.
You were, oh, okay. Okay. She's former Deputy Secretary General of the International Federation of Human Rights Leagues. She has taught political economy of development at the Sorbonne and at the INALCO, Institut National des Langues et Civilisations Orientales in Paris. She served as chief editor at Jeune Afrique. This is one of the most widely read Pan-African magazines in Francophone Africa.
A long time ago.
And now, among a long list of publications, I have picked The Valorous, so like going backwards, Les Valeureuses, 5 Tunisiennes dans l'Histoire, The Valorous, 5 Tunisian Women in History, in 2017, La Double Impasse, The Double Deadlock, the Universal Put to the Test of Religious and Merchant Fundamentalisms, 2014, Habib Bourguiba, a biography of Habib Bourguiba, published firstly in 1988, then re-edited in 2012. Also, keep in mind that 2012, this is right after the revolution.
With Sohaib al-Hassan, I didn't write this biography alone.
Yeah. So the Bourguiba biography is co-written with Sohaib al-Hassan. Dedans dehors, Inside Outside. This is a short autobiography that I recommend very much, and the testimony of being a Tunisian Jewish woman, a scholar, a journalist in 1970s Tunis, in 2010. Before that, Sophie Bessis published Les Arabes, les Femmes, la Liberté, The Arabs, Women and Freedom in 2007, and L'Occident et les Autres, The West and the Others, a Supremacy Story. This is probably a bad translation from me, une histoire d'une suprématie, in 2003. This year, in early 2019, Sophie Bessis publishes A History of Tunisia, from antiquity, from Carthage to the present day. So this puts her in a list of other historians, such as Hassan Hosni Abdel Wahab, who wrote خلاصة تاريخ تونس, 1918, Charles-André Julien, Histoire de l'Afrique du Nord, 1931, محمد هادي الشريف تونس تاريخ تونس من قبل التاريخ إلى الاستقلال, so from prehistory to independence, 1980. Then Habib Boulares, Histoire de la Tunisie, les grandes dates de la préhistoire à la révolution, 2012. So again, from prehistory to the revolution this time. So this is today, the book that we are discussing today is the second historical narration written after 2011. And this is why it's very important. So so it takes, and also because the book takes the challenge to cover 3 millennia of the history of what's today commonly accepted as Tunisia, as a country. So such a project cannot be trivial, and we are most happy to be able to present it and discuss it today. So great thanks to Myriam Amri. Myriam is currently doing her Ph.D. in anthropology at Harvard University, and congratulations to her. She's just passed her general exams, and in these exams she's all these histories and historiographies of Tunisia are still fresh in her mind. So this is why we thought she would be an ideal discussant for Sophie Bessis' book. So thank you very much to you both. So the way these sessions are structured is that we start with a question and answer between Myriam and Sophie Bessis, maybe for 40 minutes or so, and then we open the discussion to the room, to you all. So feel free to ask your questions for another 40 minutes. So you're welcome to ask your questions in any language. I mean, any of the 3 common languages used here, so Arabic, French, or English. And yeah, I will now hand the floor to Myriam, and the discussion can start.
Keep it close. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So this is the book. Okay, I found that it's good to see a book. I just wanted to talk about it for like a minute, and then we can move to the question. And the way that I thought about the questions, they're organized around themes. So I'll kind of mention the theme before and then ask the question, and Professor Bessis will respond, and then we'll keep going. That's already good. So this is quite an ambitious history of Tunisia, from the sort of first settlement and the making of the Punic Carthage to the events that followed the revolution of 2011, and the book kind of ends in 2015, and we can talk about that. And I think what I enjoyed is that it is addressed to a broader public, so it's not just a book for academics, but rather for people interested in the history of Tunisia. And at the same time, it's an account of the making of Tunisia as we're thinking about it today, but also a critical take on mainstream historiography of Tunisia, especially a sort of more nationalist historiography that imagine this long 3 millennials history of Tunisia, but also kind of colonial historiography of Tunisia that emerges and kind of justifies an imperial project in the 19th century. So, and I think that both this kind of account of a history of Tunisia and this critique of historiography opened up a lot of questions in terms of how to write a history of Tunisia, in terms of how to account for silences, erasure, in terms of thinking about the subject of historiography more broadly, even beyond Tunisia. So hopefully we can address some of these things. And I kind of wanted to start with a broader thing, which is the making of the sort of book itself. And I wanted to ask, why did you have the impetus to write a history of Tunisia, but a history of Tunisia from this Carthage moment up until what we can call today?
Okay, thank you for works, yes, for invitation. And I have first of all to apologize for my English, because it's really a basic English. So maybe I'll mix French and English if I need to do that. Why did I decide to write this book on the long period, 3,000 years, which is a very, very long period? Because, and I know that the trends of historiography today are of micro-history, of anthropological history. I didn't choose this way, but I did choose a way on a long period, because I think that after the uprising of 2011, after the revolution, because I can explain why I choose to use the term of revolution and not only uprising, maybe Tunisian people, Tunisian citizens need to read their history in a new way. It means that since independence to 2011, you have mainly 2, what I can name official novels, historical novels, le roman historique. And the Tunisian citizens and the Tunisian people at school, in the academic universities, partly, they know mainly these historical novels, and they didn't have the possibility and the tools to read the history on a long time, to see what? To see in the construction of a country which is today Tunisia, which was not Tunisia in the antiquity. It was another country, another territory, another, but which in a long period remains, which is abandoned, what are the ruptures? Where can we see continuities, and how a country like Tunisia is built in the long term, in the long period. And when you begin to study the history in 3 millennia, you can see that how Tunisia was built. When you begin to consider that there is a Tunisian state, how the state was built in Tunisia, and from which period till today. What the main period, the antiquity, Carthage, of course. After that, the long Roman period, which Tunisia was part. Tunisia, what is today Tunisia, was part of the Roman Empire for 5 centuries or 6 centuries. If you take the Byzantine period, it's more than 6 centuries. After that, the Arab conquest. The Arab conquest, is it a rupture, or there is in the rupture there is continuities? And it's very interesting to see that all this period of these dates, which the official history says, okay, c'est une rupture. It's more complex of that than that. We can take the same problematic for the installation of the Ottoman Empire in Tunisia at the end of the 16th century. And so really my preoccupation was to how we did arrive to the contemporary Tunisia. And I think that a great French historian whose name is Marc Bloch said that to know the past is not only important to understand present, but it is important to build the future. And I think that now Tunisia is on a period that Tunisians have to build a future. And to build their future now, they have to know not only the present, but the long past of their country.
Just thank you for that. Before kind of going more into the historiography that you mentioned, I wanted to jump back to this idea that, as you said, it's a sort of book for a general public, so kind of for people to know an interpretation of Tunisian history. And I wanted you to talk a bit more about why you wanted to write a general public book, and kind of what were maybe the advantages and disadvantages of doing that, especially since you are kind of a trained historian. It's a sacrificial process to do so.
Yes, because you know, you have a lot, as you know, you have a lot of books you have since the independence of the country, you have a Tunisian historical school, which have some differences between them, of course. You have some, but since independence, you have the great historians who, after the colonial history, who began to read in a new way the history of the country. But I didn't want to write history for specialists, for historians. Of course, historians can read my book, but I have chosen to write a book for citizens. Of course, for citizens who have the minimal knowledge of history, because it's not, if you have not the minimal knowledge of the history of the country, it's very difficult to read my book. But this book addresses mainly to Tunisian citizens and to people who want to understand what happens today in Tunisia and what are the roots of what happens today in Tunisia. Because the specialists of the period of antiquity, of the Middle Age period, of the Ottoman Empire, of the contemporary history, have not really to discover something in my book, because they know their respective periods. But les gens cultivés, I don't know as you say les gens cultivés in English. It's a very French concept, les gens cultivés. But les gens cultivés, donc it addresses this category of people, les gens cultivés, who want to know more on the history of their country, and not only and I tried. I think it was a will in my thinking. I wanted really to deconstruct, to deconstruire. Like the theories of deconstruction are very the official novels, and I say novels because in all the countries, it's not a Tunisian specificity, of course, but all the states to build their legitimacy built un official novel, ce qu'on appelle un roman historique. Et la Tunisie vit aujourd'hui sur une série de romans historiques. You have what can I say, the Bourguibian historical novel, the historical novels of the opposition, mainly the Arabo-Islamic roman historique, and the Bourguibian roman historique is partly true, but only partly true, because a Tunisian, an eternal Tunisia from Carthage till today, of course, doesn't exist. Tunisia in the 8th century before Christ and today, it's not the same country, it's not the same history, etc. But it's partly true, because in this country, Carthage was founded, and you have a kind, not of continuity, I think that the term continuity is not true, but a kind of legacy. And you have a lot of legacies in the history of Tunisia, which make the Tunisia today. So the Bourguibian novel emphasizes these legacies. And you have another historical novel, which is the novel Arabo-Islamique, on pourrait dire, which says, okay, Tunisia begins with the Arab conquest. It means at the end of the 7th century after Christ. Huh? The Arab conquest in Tunisia takes more or less 50 years, since 650 till the beginning of the 8th century. And it's not true. The eternal Tunisia, it's not true. And the Tunisia which birth is the Arab conquest is not true too. So we have to reread history to put the different periods, the successive period, at their place. And I tried to put this different period at their place. What is the legacy of antiquity of Carthage? What is the legacy of even of the Byzantine period? For instance, I can if you take the Arlabid, the first important dynasty, Arabic dynasty in Tunisia, the Arlabid dynasty in the 9th century, but the Arlabid dynasty took the Byzantine administration and used the Byzantine administration to take power in Tunisia, for instance. At the beginning of Ottoman periods, at the beginning of 17th century, the Ottoman Beys and after the Beys took some Hafsid institution of the Middle Age to build a new administration. So it's the reason why you have to take in count these continuities. It doesn't mean that there is no ruptures. Of course there are. The introduction of Islam is a rupture, because in the antiquity, from the 1st century after Christ till the 11th century, but till the Arab conquest, North Africa, not only Tunisia, but the whole North Africa was a Christian territory. And you have to remember that Saint Augustine, for instance, of course, one of the fathers of the Catholic Church, was North African. And some of Tunisia gave 3 popes to the Christianity in the antiquity. So I wanted to remember all this history, knowing that, of course, the contemporary Tunisia has lost and has forgotten a lot of this history.
Okay, I want to focus a bit more on this kind of historiography and this longue durée history of Tunisia, because I want to push you back a bit on this kind of long history, because I think that there's a way in which kind of people could read this history as kind of locating the origins of Tunisia, and you engage critically with kind of how a national, for example, historiography locates the origin of the Tunisian state or of kind of a Tunisianness in the Hafsid Empire, even before that.
Even before, yes.
With the Almohad and things like that, and kind of how other moments of empire, for example, are read differently. They're read outside of a kind of national framework. But I still think that there's a way in which in the book there is a kind of almost locating the progressive making of Tunisia as we know it today.
Yes.
And I want to know why. And also, so first that, and then the second point is that sometimes you focus on specific things like geography, demography as well, so kind of how contemporary Tunisia, how we think about it, has kind of early on specific borders that can, for us, make us think about it as Tunisia. And so kind of how do you link these processes, the geography, the demography one, the progressive homogenization of the population that you also mentioned, to this kind of making of Tunisia? And whether this is kind of a frame that you
I think for a lot of countries, geography makes history. It's always. And what are the specificities of Tunisia on the the field of geography? A coastal country. The sea is everywhere in Tunisia, first of all. And ce n'est pas n'importe quelle mer, it's the Mediterranean Sea, which means that the Mediterranean Sea was for centuries, for millennia, one of the centers of the world. So, and Tunisia is not only a coastal country on Mediterranean, but it controls with Italia the détroit de Sicile. Comment on dit un détroit en... le détroit de Sicile. Oui, voilà. And Tunisia and Italy are the only 2 countries in the Mediterranean area which are part, on the western part of the Mediterranean and on the eastern part of the Mediterranean. So the influences of west and of east did build the history of Tunisia. First of all, Tunisia, the contrary of Algeria and Morocco, has no high mountains. It's a country where you can circulate very easily. So, how many invasions has known Tunisia? Because it's very easy to invade Tunisia, to circulate in Tunisia. And it's the geography that builds. The highest mountain in Tunisia is 100 and 500 meters. It's nothing. In Algeria and Morocco, you have high mountains, and the populations, the indigenous population, the autochthone populations, with the conquest in Algeria, in Morocco, they went to the mountains, and they remains. And the reason why in Algeria, in Morocco, you have a very important Berberian population, Amazigh population. In Tunisia, they have quite disappeared. They are very modest because the Arabic invasion and the other invasions, you have no places, high mountains to go to resist to these invasions. For the demography, so it's geography. I may give other examples, but it's enough, I think. For the demography, because Tunisia is coastal country and on the Mediterranean, it means that Tunisia, what is today Tunisia, from the antiquity, did participate of all the trade, the geopolitical events on the Mediterranean area. And donc, it means that the merchant activities were very important. And Tunisia is, for the western part of the Arab world, for the North Africa, the more urbanized country in the West Africa, from the antiquity. If you go around Tunisia, you know the ruins, you can see the ruins of very important cities from the antiquity. And at the Roman period, Tunisia, what is today Tunisia, was one of the most urbanized territories of the Western Roman Empire. And Carthage, the Roman Carthage, not the Punic Carthage, was the third city of the Roman Empire after Rome and Alexandria. So, you know l'ancienneté of the urbanization. And at the end of the 19th century, the urban population in Tunisia was 15%, between 15 and 20% of the Tunisian population, which was at that time very, very important in the major parts of world countries, and it was between 5 and 10% of the population. So it's a characteristic very important. And the coastal population in the Sahel, for instance, in the region of Sfax, even the rural populations are, from the antiquity, sedentary population. They are not nomadic populations. The nomadic you find the nomadic populations in the hinterland countryside and not in the coastal population. So you have this demographic continuities, this demographic permanence, as you know, which are a very important part of the Tunisian history. And you can, for instance, even for the post-independence history, if you take, I go from the antiquity to today because it's important. If you take the experience of Ben Salah, the socialist experience of Ben Salah in the 60s. The main opposition to the socialist, the cooperative experience of Ben Salah came from these rural villages of the Sahel, who are the owners of their land from the antiquity. And even French colonization didn't colonize the Sahel, for instance. The farmer colonization of France colonized all the northwest and the north of Tunisia because they were the most fertile lands, but not the Sahel. And this opposition to the politics of collectivization of Ben Salah came from this part of coastal Tunisia made by villages, by sedentary rural populations who did own their land from centuries, and they didn't accept, because of this tradition, they didn't accept the collectivization and the socialization of agriculture during the period of Ben Salah. Donc you can see this kind of, donc you said geography, demography, and the third?
The other one that I wanted to talk about was the making of the state.
The making of the state, very interesting, because of course it's not the same state from antiquity till today, but you have state constructions very different from each other, but since the antiquity. Carthage, you know, well, it's not exactly a legend, but Tunisian people like to remind that Aristotle spoke of Tunisian the constitution of Carthage. We don't have the constitution of Carthage. We don't have any text because it disappeared, because Carthage was destroyed by Romans in 146 before Christ. Donc it doesn't remain anything from the archive of Carthage. But Aristotle spoke of the Carthaginoese constitution, and so you had the former kind of state. After that, in the long Roman period, of course, in the Roman Empire is, in the history of humanity, not history of Tunisia only, one of the strongest states. You have Egypt, the antique Egypt, of course, China, the Roman Empire. You have some states very strong and very who did live in the long term, and so Tunisia was part of this Roman state with institutions, the municipal institution, very strong. After that, and I speak like that, but of course there are ruptures and not only continuities, but you have some habitude of the state. After that, the two important dynasties after the Arab conquest, for 1 century, the Aghlabid dynasty, and after all the problems in the Middle Age, after that, since the 30th century, the Hafsid dynasty reigned on Tunisia for more than 3 centuries. And you can begin to speak, for the Hafsid period, of element of state, real. What does it mean? State. The control of the territory is the state. The control of the fiscality, of the taxes, of tax system. And the Hafsid invented the mahalla, which is, the mahalla is le camp fiscal. The tax authorities went to the country to take the taxes, and Ottoman authorities took this Hafsid tradition of Mahalla and they developed the fiscalité, fiscalité, contrôle du territoire, armée, of course. And so you have, and you have really, some historians speak of the proto-state, but we can speak of the first, the tools of not a modern state, it was a medieval state, but tools of a state. And after that, the Ottoman period, it's very important for the construction of the state. Why? Because it's at the beginning of the 17th century that Tunisia has more or less its frontier, this limit of today, at the beginning of the 20th century. So the actual territory of the Tunisia is an ancient one. And it's one of the biggest, my point of view, differences between North Africa and Middle East. If you see the three countries of Central North Africa, the frontiers didn't move. They moved, but not totally, not in a very important way. If you see the Middle East, the frontier of the Middle East state of today, if you can speak of states today, but it's another problem, are very recent. It's the division of the Ottoman Empire. So it's a very, you have in the Middle East new states, not ancient. You have ancient tradition of state, of course, but the actual frontiers are not as ancient as in North Africa. So you have the frontier, you have two treaties between two agreements between the Tunis Regency and the Ajiz Regency. The last one was in 1628, more or less, which delimits the frontier between Tunis, the régions de Tunis and the régions d'Alger. And you have, and which is very important because we can speak about the phenomena of secularization, the secularization. This frontier is not a religious frontier. It's not, because in the Middle Ages, when you see the empires, the North African empires of the Middle Ages, it is the religious logic that, for the Almohads, because you cited Almohads, for instance, is a religious logic which qui anime les conquêtes. C'est la logique religieuse. Les Almohades conquièrent l'Afrique du Nord au nom de l'idéologie religieuse de l'almohadisme. À l'époque ottomane, at the Ottoman period, the frontiers are totally secular, totally secular. The state begin, of course, religion is it's the tool, the main tool of legitimation of the bey of the bey. But for instance, if you take the tax system in the Ottoman period, the tax system begins to become secular. The taxes is not only the zakat. The zakat, of course, there is the zakat, but you have a lot of taxes which are totally secular. The taxes on the olive trees, the taxes on corn, no, on wheat. There is no corn in Tunisia, but on wheat, the tax of a series of taxes which are totally secular. So you have a beginning of a secularization of the state tools, which is very important. And after that, of course, you have the reformist period at the beginning of 19th century, which tries to build a modern state.
Okay, so if we have perennial factors, as we talked about, geography, demography, ideas about continuity of the state, then how do we not fall into a nationalist historiography? Like which ruptures do we locate? So you talked about kind of continuities that we can locate, but then which ruptures do we locate that allow us not to slip into a sort of national historiography of the kind of 3,000 years of Tunisia, which is still very prevalent today, even among the sort of general public, or historians actually?
The ruptures are difficult to see because you have in the same time ruptures and continuities. Of course, the end of the Roman Empire, of the Byzantine period. Well, you have a Vandal period, but it's not very important in the history of Tunisia. But the Arab conquest and the introduction of Islam is a rupture. Why is a rupture? Because before the Arabic conquest, you had some kind of homogeneity in the Mediterranean civilization, and another civilization comes to the south, to Mediterranean, coming from east, from southeast. The introduction of Islam is and is not a rupture. Is the reason why it's very difficult. Why I say it is and it is not. It is not because mainly North Africa was monotheist. Mainly Christian and with Jewish minorities. So Islam is the third monotheism, and North Africa doesn't come from polytheism to monotheism. No, North Africa come from ancient monotheism to the youngest monotheism we can say with Islam. So it's not exact, but it's a rupture because Islam links Tunisia to the Middle East, and Tunisia, there is a rupture with the north of Mediterranean, because north of Mediterranean remain the land of Christianity. So you can say that it's a rupture. It's not, and it is, but it is. And now, what you can say, seeing the Tunisia of today, is that, of course, Islam became the main structure of the Tunisian society. But you have Arabic too. The language is very important. It's not we can say for Tunisia mainly, but even for the north, the other North African countries, that they were quickly Islamized. Islam took more or less 1 century to become the main religion of North Africa. But not Arabization. Arabization came later because the Arab conquest, you have very few Arab troops in Tunisia and in North Africa. And the real Arabization of Tunisia is at the 11th century with the Hilalian invasions. Les invasions hilaliennes sont l'arabisation de la Tunisie, which is important of Tunisia, not of Algeria and Morocco, because in Algeria and Morocco you have very important Amazigh minority, and not in Tunisia. Donc, you can say that the Arabization of Tunisia is really achieved at the 11th century. Donc it took 3 centuries, and the Islamization, the total, or more or less total Islamization, happened with Almohad in the in the 12th century, because the doctrine, the theological doctrine of Almohad was very, some historians said that the Almohad was the Daesh of that period because it was very intolerant religious ideology, and the last Christians disappears in the Almohad period. Till the 11th century, you had 11 évêchés, what do we say, archbishop in Tunisia, till the 11th century. No. So, you know, you see that you have ruptures, but the rupture take a very long time to be achieved. Take centuries to be achieved if we consider Arabization and Islamization.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to think a bit about scale in relation to this kind of, especially I think in the first period, there's a way in which a history of the making of what we call today now Tunisia is embedded in a history of different empires and different civilization, if we want to use the term. And I want to think about what would be the advantages of having a regional scale and a regional a history of Tunisia within a regional scale, and what scale would be different. What scale would be the most important one? You talk a lot in the book about the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean as kind of a forgotten frame of historiography. So maybe you can talk a bit about that. Thank you.
Yes, I think that you cannot, and it's not only for Tunisia, for all countries, you cannot consider Tunisia as an island in the ocean. Tunisia is in a continent, is in a region, and of course is influenced by what happens in this continent, in this region. You say it's part of the Mediterranean civilizations, and from antiquity till the end of the Hafsid period, Tunisia is part of all what happens in Mediterranean. Some periods in an hegemonic position and some period not. For instance, as an hegemonic position at the Aghlabid period, because the Aghlabid conquest the major part of Sicilia. For instance, I don't speak of Carthage, of course, because Carthage, the part of Sicilia, Sardinia, Corsica, Balear Island was properties of Carthage, but it's too. But in the Aghlabid period, it's very important because the Aghlabid kingdom of Tunisia, Emirat, the Aghlabid Emirate, conquered a part of Sicilia and was one of the powers of the Western Mediterranean. On the Fatimid period too. On the Fatimid period, the period where during Fatimid, the Fatimid were North African dynasty. After that, they went to Egypt, and they reigned on Egypt for 2 centuries, the Fatimids. But you have 60 years where Fatimid were born in Tunisia. They founded Mahdi, the city of Mahdi, the city of Mahdi. The Fatimids were Shiite, were Shia. And the Fatimid was a very important power in the Mediterranean. At the contrary, the Hafsid dynasty was not the main power in Mediterranean. No. After that, how Ottoman Empire took Tunisia? It's in the big conflict between Spain and Istanbul, between Charles Quint and the beginning Ottoman Empire. And we have 2 powers, the Hispanic power and the Ottoman power, which fight in Tunisia. And Tunisia was for 60 years the the terrain d'affrontement between Spain and the Ottoman Empire till the conquest of Ottoman Empire in 1574. But the Charles Quint, the Emperor Charles Quint, took Tunis and La Goleta in 1535. Donc Tunisia was a part of the big conflict for the control of Mediterranean between Spain and Ottoman Empire. After that, if we cross some centuries and if we go to the 19th century, of course, you cannot understand what happened in Tunisia, the reformist period and the protectorate, if you don't place that in the big imperialist expansion of European powers since the beginning of the 19th century, after the les guerres napoléoniennes, the Napoleonic Wars, and the imperialist rivalries in the Mediterranean between France, Britain, Great Britain, and Italy, too, because Italy had a revendication, very strong one, on Tunisia. And the very important date for Tunisia, for instance, is not a Tunisian date, but it's the conquest of Algeria in 1830 by France, in the beginning of the occupation of North Africa by France. So it has an influence on the Tunisian politics, of course, very important. This date is as important as the date of the instauration of protectorates. So you have to consider the history of a country, in this case of Tunisia, in a more global context, which have a critical influence on the local history.
Okay, this is a great segue actually, because in relation to scale, I want to talk about periodization.
Yes.
And obviously I'm not a historian, so I'm very unattuned to chronology.
Yes.
But maybe you can talk a bit about kind of what were the advantage of a chronological history of Tunisia rather than, for example, a thematic one, and then focusing on a specific dates, and that will lead us to kind of a more contemporary time. You divide the book in two parts, and the second part begins in 1830.
Yes.
Yes. So why this specific moment of 1830, especially in relation to other kind of modern history of Tunisia? Maybe the people who are English speaker have read the Perkins book, A Modern History of Tunisia, which kind of begins more in the colonial period. So kind of why chronology and then why 1830?
Because I think that, as I said, the beginning of the imperialist not only occupation influence in Tunisia begins in the 30s of 19th century. And what is the reaction by the Tunisian elites? It's what you say, the reformism, which begins with the reign of Ahmed Bey, and Ahmed Bey arrives to the throne in 35 or 37, I forgot, 35. So it's very important. After the occupation of Algiers by French people, with the rivalries between France and Great Britain, the two big powers in Europe. Germany was not a big power at that time. It begins later. So the Tunisian elites, which were at that period, it's one of the problem, foreigners elites, because there were the Mamluks, the Tunisian elites were the elite, the Mamluk elites, but thinks that the reform is the condition to remain independent from the French, the imperialist powers. And this very important period of reformism begins in the 30s. And this period of reformist, you have the Pacte Fondamentale, the first constitution, the uprising of 1864, which is a very important uprising in Tunisia, which has consequences, very important consequences. And all this period of reformism has its a defeat in terms of politics, because the French protectorates begins in 81. But this reformist period built the consciousness of Tunisian elites till today. All the, what we say, the modernist Tunisian elites revendique, what do we say, revendique? Claim the reformist legacy. And you have not one political leader in Tunisia from before Bourguiba, from Abdelaziz Taalbi, from Mahmoud al-Matri, from to all of the 20th century of the struggle for national liberation, the party, les Jeunes Tunisiens, the young Tunisians, till Bourguiba, of course, and even Ben Ali, who didn't say at one moment and another one, we follow this reformist tradition of Tunisia. So it means that in the conscious and the consciousness of Tunisian elites, this reformist period, even if it was a political defeat, you cannot understand the construction of political mind of Tunisian elites without thinking to this period. And you have not many Arab countries in this case. You have Egypt, of course, which is the motherland of reformism. You have Egypt, you have part of Syria, Palestine, and Tunisia, and that's all. And that's all. In other countries, reformism came much more later, as in Morocco, for instance. You have the first reformist in the 30s of the 20th centuries. In Algeria was totally colonized, donc it was much more difficult, of course. So it's a reason why for me, the contemporary period begins with this reformist experience and not with the protectorates. Of course, the French protectorate is very important because it changed many things in Tunisia, but the history of modern Tunisia doesn't become with protectorate, with the instauration of protectorate. This récit, it's part of the colonial historiography, saying the colonial historiography said of the modernity in Tunisia began with protectorate. It's not true. It's not true. We have to go a little earlier to understand the trajectoire, the itinerary of Tunisia.
Okay, other perfect segue. I wanted to think more about terms, and you mentioned reformism, so maybe if we can kind of define it for people who are not necessarily attuned with Tunisian historiography, but also how reformism is linked to a specific notion of modernity, and you question a lot the idea of modernity and kind of how it's used in the colonial historiography, but also in the national one. So maybe kind of thinking about this as terms and as very charged terms.
Yes, of course.
Up until today, and kind of how do we define it and how do we think about it through the sources historically? Because the question for me was, is modernity a process? Are you thinking about it as a period? Is it an emic term? Do people start to use modernity in a specific time in the 19th century and therefore it becomes a sort of part of a lexical field? And how it's linked to a history of reformism in this case of Tunisia?
I don't begin to speak generally of modernities because you know that you have entire library on that, and we can stay some nights, days, weeks, months to speak about that. But which is, so what is modernity? It's a whole question, of course. What does it mean, this term, and how it was used by different ideologies? What we can say for the specific period of reformism, and I'll stop there because it's too wide, is that what I named the Tunisian elites said regarding the imperialist offensive, that how can we resist to this imperialist offensive? We have to modernize our states. So for the reformist of this period is to modernize the state. Not, and this is very important, because you can understand the defeat of reformism with that. It was not really to modernize the society. It was to modernize the state. And the society was more or less abandoned. So they tried. Ahmed Bey tried, and the Beys coming after Ahmed Bey tried with the pressure of the imperialist powers, of course, too. And because saying that if we don't modernize our states, we will be eaten by the imperialists, and they tried. Making a constitution, making a modern army with conscription, etc., etc. And the challenge of these elites and of these powers was to demonstrate that the modernization of the state didn't go against religion. It was the big challenge. It is not against religion. So you have, in the same time, if you see the Pacte Fondamental and if you see the Constitution, a kind of secularization and le souci, what do we say, le souci, la préoccupation.
The worry.
Hein?
The worry.
Yes, to protect religion, because religions and the ulamas were a power. The religious power was a real power, of the state power and the religious power. And all the preoccupation of the Beys and the Mamluk elites, like Khalid Besha, for instance, the main books of this period of reformist, the books of Ben Dief, Khalid Besha, Mohammed Bayram the Fifth, some books very important. The historian consider that the book of Khalid Besha is the first book of what is named Muslim constitutionalism, for instance. But in the intellectual thinking of the Arab world at that period, between the 30s and the beginning of the 20th century, you have two de courants, what do we say, de courants, de principaux. The courant, the two trends, the courant of the Tajdid and the courant of the Nahda, which is not exactly the same. And these Mamluk elites were in the courant of the Tajdid. And the question is, how can we modernize Islam? We have to modernize Islam. But the other courant of the Nahda, with Afghani, with Muhammad Abdu, it was another intellectual trend, saying, of course, we have to take some tools of West, because we need some tools of the West. But the preoccupation is how to Islamize modernity. Not to modernize Islam, but to Islamize modernity. And it's very interesting because these two trends from the 19th century is till today the main trends of the political thinking in the Arab world. So
you have sort of in that moment of the 19th century, and we can kind of stay on it for a little while, that movement of reformism, kind of elite moment in times of perceived urgency. But at the same time, you talk a bit in the book about how le peuple, the sha'ab, the people, the English translation is weird, becomes an object, and an object of politics in that same period. And especially I think you talk about the kind of reactions to that reformism. I think there was this kind of massive protest and repression in 1864, something like that, in reaction to sort of the reformist modernization politics. So I want to think about kind of how do mass politics emerge at the same time, and kind of how does the sha'ab become also kind of object of politics?
Sha'ab, le peuple, sha'ab is a very modern concept. In the traditional political Arabic political sense, it's amma ou khassa. It's not sha'ab. Sha'ab is very modern, and the concept of people of sha'ab began really in the 20th century with the birth of the labor movement, the trade union movement, that the concept of sha'ab, which is very modern. In Europe too, it's a very modern concept. The uprising of 864, which was a very important uprising, it was an uprising against reformism, because the mass, ce qu'on peut appeler les masses du pays profond, the deep country, was against the destruction of the traditional powers. Why? And why they were against reformists? Totally against. Because for them, what meant reformism? More taxes, because reformism, the reform had to be financed, of course. And how do you finance reforms? Taking money to the people. Donc, the uprising began when the Bey decided to double the mejba, which was the most important tax, the mejba. And he decided to double the mejba, and all the country began to revolt against the tax. For them, reformism was tax. They thought that reformism was against religion because it was a certain kind of secularism, the constitution, and against the equality of rights between minorities and the Muslim people. And again, they wanted, and against the centralization of power. They wanted to conserve the local power, the tribal powers, the ulama, the local ulama powers. So they didn't understand what was the sense, the meaning of reform. Why? They didn't understand what was the meaning of reform. First, as I said, because reform for them was the destruction of traditional structures and the growing of taxes. And nobody went to explain to the people what was reform. Well, as I said, reform was the state, was not for the society. And so society didn't support reform because they were submitted to reform. And it's in the beginning of the 20th century that people began to take, because of colonization, the tools of what you can say the social modernity to build certain forms of resistance, which was the labor movement, for example. The first trade union, the national trade union in Tunisia, was the first of the Arab world in 1922 of Muhammad al-Ilhami.
Okay, I have like 4 million other questions, but I'll try to start to keep them brief so we can move to questions by the audience. And one of the things that I want to focus on in the book, and that I thought was probably the strongest chapter of the book, is when you talk about colonization, and kind of two things that maybe you want to elaborate on. The first is that you focus the sort of history of colonization as a history of economic exploitation, which is not often actually seen in the kind of, even in the nationalist historiography. So maybe you can talk a bit about that. And the second point is that you entangle from the beginning a history of colonialism with a history of resistance and a sort of beginning of a decolonial movement from the sort of onset of the making of the protectorate. So kind of why these two choices, the kind of focus on capitalist penetration, economic exploitation, and then on the other hand of kind of a history of resistance that is entangled?
Because the colonization and resistance as narrowly linked, of course. Since the beginning of colonization, you begin, and which is interesting, that is, colonization put an end to the reformist movement. It was no more useful. And the reformist movement began to be replaced by the nationalist movement with the colonization. And you cannot separate colonization from resistance to colonization. Of course, it's the same trend, it's the same movement. And which is very important in my point of view is the economic colonization. Because why is very important? Because it created an urban and rural proletariat. The creation of a proletariat, the modern proletariat, is the economic change that colonization did bring in Tunisia. And this proletariat of workers, of industries, of rural workers, because colonization took lands, and so a part of the peasants of the agriculture become rural workers, and all this new class of workers form the first and the mass of the resistance movement to colonization. So it's very narrowly linked. You can, for me, it was not interesting to separate both, because at each step of colonization corresponds a step of the liberation movement. They are so narrowly linked.
Okay, so jumping from this kind of colonial period to what we call post-colonial, you say, I wrote the page number, it's on page 362, that the first 10 years, that the first...
What?
362.
362, what I say.
Yes. You say that the first 10 years of the post-colonial moment, so the sort of post-independence moment, changed the country more than the entire previous century. You say three-quarter.
Yes.
Yeah. You ask the question and you say that we can kind of actually make the argument for it. So why could we make the argument for it?
Because the first 10 years, and maybe you can say the first 5 or 6 years after independence, the first, okay, we can say the first 10 years. The reforms of the Bourguiba regime were des réformes sociétales, pas seulement des réformes sociales, des réformes sociétales qui ont changé le visage de la Tunisie. Because the proper of colonization, and in all colonized countries, not only in Tunisia, is that it is an economic colonization, a political colonization means that the colonial administrations replaces the ancient administration to control the country, but it does not. There is no societal colonization. All the colonial powers used to deal with traditional local powers everywhere. They did, okay, keep society. We want to have peace, calm, and to exploit the country as we want to exploit it. But you can keep society. So in all the colonial experiences, the colonial authorities used to deal with traditional powers. Okay. What made Bourguiba is to destroy traditional powers completely. And this destruction of traditional powers is a kind of revolution, societal one. Why women? Why le Majella, le code du statut personnel? Because Bourguiba was a dictator, of course, but very intelligent dictator. And he knew that changing the situation of women was the more useful tool to destroy traditional powers. It's obvious. So the reform on women, the Code du statut personnel, the reform of courts, because the Bourguiba in 56 and 57 abolished, what do we say?
Abolishes.
Yes, abolished religious courts, Shara'ic courts and rabbinic courts, and to replace them for civil courts. So religious courts was abolished totally. Donc réforme de la justice, réforme du statut des femmes, réforme de l'administration, parce que during the colonial period you have the traditional administration, the sheikhs and the caïd, and the colonial administration, les contrôleurs civils. And the Bourguiba destroyed all that to create governorates with governor, the Wellies, and the délégué. So it is a very important change, and this change is very important. Of course, education, health, etc. Because you know that Tunisia, Bourguiba knew that Tunisia is a small country, not very important, with no oil, no. So Bourguiba decided not to create an army, or a very small army. And in the first 10 years of independence, 30% of the budget was devoted to education, which means, of course, very important. In the same time, Bourguiba put in jail his opponents. I don't want to make a portrait of Bourguiba, only you have the dark face of Bourguiba. Of course, it does exist, the dark face of Bourguiba, but Bourguiba was the first in the contemporary period, post-colonization, réformateur in Tunisia, and a very important réformateur. And these 10 years changed the face of Tunisia and contributed, not only them, to build the Tunisia we know today.
Okay, so leaving maybe aside, maybe someone in the audience will have questioned the sort of Ben Ali period that I don't want to touch on right now. CMES also. I want to talk about, so you end the
Maybe
book
after
with a
that
chapter. Yeah, and then we open it up. This is the last time I'll speak. You kind of end the book with this period, the 2011 to 2015 period, where you try to
the last one.
The sort of last chapter before the conclusion.
Very short one.
Yeah, but you kind of try to make a history.
Because it's a short period.
History of that period. And I think I was especially struck by the fact that you want to maintain the concept of revolution as a relevant analytic to think about the events of 2011. And I do want to ask why, though you mention it in the book, but maybe.
Because I think I had an hesitation, but I think that what happens in 2011 was not only an uprising. Why? Because of course we can say that today in Tunisia the structures of the ancien regime remain, and they remain very strong. We can say that, and it's true, but the Tunisia in 2011 changed totally political habitus, totally. So you have the post-independent period from 56 till 2011, which you can say that it's the authoritarian period. With Bourguiba and Ben Ali are very different, but it's the same authoritarian period. It's not, they differ of course, and after that, I am convinced that, of course, we can speak about today that Tunisia is entered is a new period of its history in 2011. What will be? I don't know. But it's a new period.
Okay, so with new, we'll pass it to the audience. So I don't know if there's a mic circulating.
You can ask your question in English or in French as well.
Yeah, and maybe try to keep the question as brief as possible so we have a sort of longer, as many questions as there are. Thank you.
I really apologize for my English, but I do, what can I do?
Ah, c'est très bien.
Two questions.
Yeah. First one is on the chapter on the colonial period, the 1881.
Which period?
The colonial one.
The colonial one.
The colonial one. So I wrote down the questions in
Which
the morning.
page?
It's not a page, just I wrote down the questions in the morning when I was reading it again. So how do you think post-colonial or decolonial literature can inform or has informed or influenced your historiography of the French rule over Tunisia? Because it seems to me that even though you've been trying, or you claim that you tried to present a new historiography, it still remains the same, that very similar to at least the dominant discourse. And the second question is about the bibliography, the sources. You don't use that many sources to support some facts. I say,
for instance,
I mean, there are many information that you present as facts, but they are debatable and there is no source. So I wonder.
Give me an example.
Okay, give simple example in the part on the colonial period when you talk about the military zone and the south of Gabes, and you say that it was a military zone until the independence, while in reality, in the Convention Générale, it remained, and until now.
Quelle Convention Générale?
Convention 55. And the annexes, you can find that it's still a military zone, and until now it's still a military zone. So I mean, this is a simple example. There are many other examples later on. For example, in the 2011 period, when you talk about, for example, the military, that the fact that they didn't support the regime, factually, the military killed and supported to a certain extent people who wrote on civil military relation after the revolution, who studied that. So there are So my question was first about the lack of sourcing to confirm but the second thing, I was really surprised by the domination of French and Francophone sources. So, and there are very, very few, if not any, I would say more, any Arabic sources. So why?
Okay. I'll try to answer. For the post-colonial, decolonial, I have to say that I'm not at all influenced by decolonial studies because I am not really, I don't really agree. Post-colonial studies are very interesting. Even if I don't agree with all the thoughts of post-colonial studies, you have very interesting reflections, thinkings in post-colonial studies. With the Indians, because they begin in South America, India, with all the Dipesh Chakrabarti, etc. With, of course, with one of the fathers of post-colonial studies, Edward Said, etc., etc. So it can be very useful. Decolonial studies is very, I cannot speak about decolonial studies because it's not the subject of today, of course, but it's a very, I think, a narrow movement and very sociologically situated. So I didn't need the tools of these studies to do this part of the study of Tunisia, because I think that you can make history, write history, sans forcément être dans les modes contemporains. Et je n'ai pas voulu être dans les modes. Comment on dit la mode en anglais? La mode, comme on dit la mode vestimentaire. This is, donc, les concepts décoloniaux, pour moi, les décoloniaux n'ont pas de réel concept. Autant les penseurs de la postcolonialité ont inventé des concepts qui peuvent être extrêmement utiles, autant je ne vois pas d'invention de concepts de la part des décoloniaux. Pour l'instant, je n'en ai découvert aucun, et je vous assure que j'en ai lu beaucoup. Pour ce qui est des sources, votre question est très intéressante. Je peux continuer en français? Vous savez, qui a des problèmes? Ok. Ça me repose 5 minutes, après je reprendrai avec l'anglais. Évidemment, ce livre s'adresse à des lecteurs francophones, il est écrit en français. Bon. Donc j'ai utilisé majoritairement des sources francophones. J'ai utilisé quelques sources en langue anglaise, pas mal de sources en langue italienne pour la période moderne. Non. Je ne les cite pas toutes, je l'explique dans ma bibliographie. Pourquoi je ne cite pas toutes les sources? Parce que une très grande partie de mes sources, et c'est un livre qui n'est pas un livre pour les spécialistes, une grande partie de mes sources pour l'histoire récente, ce sont des revues, des journaux, etc. Et je ne voulais pas encombrer ma bibliographie d'énormément de revues, de journaux, etc. Deuxièmement, je ne voulais pas trop m'autociter. Ça fait 40 ans que je travaille sur la Tunisie. Et évidemment, je vous assure qu'en 40 ans, j'ai écrit pas mal de pages sur la Tunisie, aussi bien comme journaliste que comme historienne. Et donc, je n'allais pas dire toutes les 3 pages, Sophie Bessis, tel article, bon, j'ai un minimum quand même de décence, on va dire. Pour les sources arabes, votre question est extrêmement intéressante. Alors, je lis mal l'arabe, mais des amis historiens m'ont aidé, et il y a certains bouquins fondamentaux en arabe auxquels j'ai pu avoir accès, par exemple sur les études ottomanes, les bouquins de Fatma Ben Slimane, qui sont extrêmement intéressants, donc, et je les cite, mais il est vrai, vous avez tout à fait raison, l'essentiel de mes sources sont des sources de langue française, pas forcément des sources françaises. Voilà, francophones, parce que j'ai pris soin d'avoir dans ma bibliographie les 3/4 des bouquins cités dans ma bibliographie sont des bouquins d'historiens tunisiens. Et ça, j'y ai tenu parce que je pense qu'on peut faire une histoire de la Tunisie avec une historiographie tunisienne. Mais il est vrai que ma bibliographie en langue arabe est moins importante que ma bibliographie en langue française. Ça, je vous l'accorde sans aucun problème.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the question was on the sources and the existence of, or the lack of Arabic language sources. And so the idea is first that not all the sources were cited because some.
Oh, you translate. Okay.
Oh, I'm translating.
Well, I'll speak in English, the first.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to speak about the source
Okay.
part. The first, because a lot of the recent history and the sources of the recent history are newspaper reports and everything, so they're not necessarily in the bibliography. And then the second point is, so Professor Bessis has been working on Tunisia for a long time, so kind of self-citation was becoming a bit redundant by that point. And the idea is also that so she did cite a few of the fundamentals of Arabic language sources, especially on the Ottoman period, for example. And the last is that she was committed to doing a historiography of Tunisia that would mainly focus or mainly cite Tunisian historians. So a lot of them have been writing in French. And so more than, I think, 3/4 of the sources are of Tunisian historians. I hope that helped.
En fait, moi, j'avais une question que je vais essayer de justifier. Donc, ma question, est-ce qu'on peut imaginer une histoire populaire de la Tunisie ? Est-ce qu'on peut imaginer, par exemple, une histoire populaire du réformisme tel qu'il a été vécu au XIXe siècle par la société ? C'est-à-dire que y a deux choses qui m'ont fait penser à ça. Vous avez dit que la Tunisie est un pays côtier, it's a fact, un pays urbain, 15 à 20%, en effet, mais moi ce qui me travaille, c'est que l'historiographie tunisienne, j'ai l'impression qu'elle se base toujours sur ça, le pays côtier, le pays urbain, c'est-à-dire par exemple, je pensais à l'exposition L'éveil d'une nation,
Par exemple,
qui disait littéralement, dans l'introduction, qui disait... d'ailleurs qui était entièrement côtière et entièrement urbaine. Tout ce dont on parlait dans cette exposition était urbain et côtier et étatique. Et qui disait, le peuple tunisien a été créé... je paraphrase, mais vraiment à peine pour le coup. Le peuple tunisien est né de la modernité de l'État tunisien. Ce qui est historiquement problématique.
Contestable même.
Et peut-être la deuxième chose, ou alors j'ai oublié. Ouais, voilà. Parce que vous avez dit justement tout à l'heure que le charbe était un concept moderne. Mais donc à partir de là, est-ce qu'on peut justement imaginer cette histoire populaire, ou alors, puisque le charbe est un concept moderne né au XXe siècle, il faut laisser tomber. Ensuite, c'est une question qui n'a pas forcément à voir avec ce dont on a parlé, ni avec votre livre que j'ai pas lu malheureusement. Mais je voulais me poser une question sur le récit national et en particulier le nationalisme quand il est... c'est-à-dire il y a une manière de mettre en scène le nationalisme au tiers-monde comme étant un gentil nationalisme par rapport au nationalisme européen ou occidentaux. Et en Tunisie, ça a quelque chose d'assez... dans tous les pays décolonisés, post-colonisés, etc., il y a ce truc de notre nationalisme, c'est un bon nationalisme, c'est un nationalisme qui nous a donné l'indépendance, tout ça. Et j'ai l'impression que ce nationalisme et le récit national qu'il crée, justement, est pourtant un récit qui est très uniformisateur, très attaché à l'idée d'une certaine uniformité. Et je réfléchissais, par exemple, dans le cas de la Tunisie, par exemple, la hara. Je lisais un roman de Colette Felouz qui racontait comment en 1956, la première chose qui a été faite, c'était...
la destruction de la hara.
Voilà, la destruction de la hara, la création du jardin du passage qui a remplacé le cimetière juif. Et c'est cette histoire-là, j'ai l'impression qu'elle n'est pas... Déjà, elle n'est pas incluse, évidemment, mais elle n'arrive pas à détricoter
Ok.
ce récit.
Ok.
Voilà,
J'ai
donc
compris.
j'arrête là, c'est un peu long déjà.
Can you please translate before?
Because you don't understand.
Other people don't, huh?
I can do it.
Some people don't.
You can
Yeah.
summarize your questions? Oh.
I can. Well, so my first question was. What?
You have the same questions.
Okay. So my first question was: Is it possible to write a popular history of Tunisia as the concept of people? As she mentioned, that the concept of people is a modern concept, but I argue that the history of Tunisia has always been a coastal and urban history. So is it possible to imagine another kind of history that would be more inclusive? And the second question
About
was,
nationalism.
Sorry?
About nationalism.
Yes, was about how nationalism in the third world is always built as something like it's not as it's better than Western nationalism, for example, which Western nationalism is considered as to be exclusive, racist, whatever. But third world nationalism is nice because it brought independence, etc., etc. So why? And I mentioned the Jewish exclusion that started from the very beginnings of independence, and how. So why is it that this historiography that we can find in novels, we can find in books, but hasn't.
Ok, je vais répondre.
Ouais, ok. J'ai pas fini la phrase.
May I continue to speak French or it's not? If it, okay, the last.
Yeah, you can go. I mean, speak on the language
Okay.
you choose, but please
Because
use the mic.
because these two questions are very interesting. I think that, pardon, these two questions are very interesting. I think that we can write a popular history of Tunisia. Where you are totally right is that the sources of the whole Tunisian history as urban sources. And we can say that for rural urban history, and not only rural urban history, but Bedouinity, urbanity, we have till today what we can name the Chaldonian bias. C'est vraiment le biais chaldonien de l'historiographie, c'est-à-dire les urbains contre les ruraux, etc. Donc, oui, je pense qu'une histoire populaire de la Tunisie, vous savez que l'historien Gérard Noiriel en France vient de publier un livre qui s'appelle Histoire populaire de la France. Justement, c'est un essai d'histoire populaire très intéressant. Oui, parce qu'on comprendrait beaucoup de choses qui sont occultées par l'histoire, et pas seulement par l'histoire officielle d'ailleurs, pas seulement par l'historiographie contemporaine de la Tunisie. Et par exemple, moi j'ai essayé un peu dans l'ouvrage d'avoir un regard un peu différent sur les invasions hélaliennes, par exemple, et sur la révolte de 1864. Bon. En essayant de comprendre pourquoi les masses tunisiennes ont refusé avec autant d'énergie le réformisme. Pas pour dire ce sont des masses arriérées, point, stop. Voilà. Non, il faut aller au-delà. C'est pas seulement dire c'est des masses arriérées qui ont refusé le... Pourquoi est-ce qu'elles ont... Il y a la clim qui a été remise. Mais c'est pas grave, là, laissez. Donc, pourquoi? Donc, je trouve que essayer... Alors, il y a un vrai problème de source. Les sources populaires sont essentiellement des sources orales. Il n'y a pas de source écrite. Même pour les invasions hélaliennes, on a seulement la geste hilalienne. Bon, il y a quand même pour la version tunisienne de la geste hilalienne, il y a la version qui a été recueillie par la traditionniste Lucienne Saada sur la version tunisienne de la geste hilalienne, bon, qui est très intéressant d'ailleurs de lire la geste hilalienne. Mais il y a très peu de sources, hein, très peu de sources. La paysannerie, les nomades, les tribus, eh ben, ils n'écrivent pas. Voilà. Donc, est-ce que maintenant, la question qu'on peut se poser, est-ce qu'il y a maintenant encore des dépositaires de cette histoire dans la Tunisie d'aujourd'hui? Je ne suis pas sûr. Mais il suffirait qu'il y ait une bonne école de traditionnistes pour au moins essayer d'aller chercher ça. Voilà. Ça, c'est la réponse à la première question.
A second.
Excuse me for this
No worries at all.
additional work.
No worries. So the kind of picking up on the Khaldunian bias, so Ibn Khaldun, and the idea of the sort of eternal opposition and conflict between the rural and the urban, that still permeates a lot of the historiography today. And it's the idea that this popular history was clearly erased from kind of mainstream historiography of Tunisia, and that in the book there's an attempt to think about it through two moments. The first is the Hilalian invasions, so of the tribes of the Hilal to the south. And then the second one is the 1864 moment, which we mentioned before, where kind of there were a lot of mass protest against this reformist moment, and how they ought to be imagined as something else than kind of people being backwards and refusing reforms and change. But the real problem is in the sources, since most of sources that would attend to a history of people would be oral sources rather than written ones. And so kind of questioning and asking whether there are kind of remaining repositories of sources of nomadism, of kind of a tribe culture, of rural spaces, and whether there's a school of traditionalists and of people willing to engage with this kind of different sources.
Je ne sais pas quelle est la différence en anglais entre les traditionnistes. Dans l'historiographie en langue française, les traditionnistes sont les historiens qui recueillent la tradition. Ce n'est pas des traditionalistes. Hein. C'est les écoles, par exemple, dans l'histoire de l'Afrique subsaharienne, les traditionnistes, les historiens traditionnistes sont très importants. Je pense à Amadou Ampateba, je pense à Djibril Tamsirnian, les grands traditionnistes qui ont recueilli l'histoire du Mandingue, l'histoire de l'Empire du Mali, etc. Donc c'est ceux qui vont recueillir la tradition orale et l'histoire orale.
So just a specificity, I don't know what the exact term would be in English, but traditionism, not as traditionalism, but the idea of the school of historians who collected oral histories.
The collectors of oral tradition.
Sorry? Okay.
Excuse me.
Folklorist, yeah. Folklorist?
I don't know, I don't like this word of folklorist because so.
I mean, I think it's linked to a more specific school, and especially of kind of sub-Saharan historians of sub-Saharan Africa who collected histories of African empires in kind of
And
earlier
the second question, yes, excuse me. The second question about nationalism. Là aussi, hein, Myriam va me traduire. Donc, il n'y a pas de différence fondamentale entre les nationalismes. Bien entendu, les nationalismes européens se sont développés au XIXe siècle dans un contexte impérialisme, donc ont été des nationalismes dominants, bien entendu. Mais moi, je fais une différence, et je ne suis pas la seule, fondamentale entre lutte de libération nationale et nationalisme. Une lutte de libération nationale n'est pas forcément nationaliste. C'est une lutte de libération qui se libère du colonisateur, de l'occupant, de l'exploitant. Cela ne veut pas dire qu'elle doit être obligatoirement menée par une idéologie nationaliste. C'est pas pareil. Il y a des luttes de libération nationale qui ne se sont pas menées au nom d'une idéologie nationaliste. En Tunisie, comme dans l'ensemble du monde arabe et dans d'autres pays, effectivement, il y a eu une tendance, ce qu'on appelle nationaliste arabe, qui a été hégémonique, même si Bourguiba lui-même n'était pas un nationaliste arabe, mais il a laissé faire. Et là où il n'y a aucune spécificité tunisienne, ou une faible, on ne va pas dire aucune, une faible spécificité tunisienne, c'est dans le traitement des minorités. Le traitement des minorités en Tunisie a été un traitement qu'on le retrouve dans l'ensemble du monde arabe, c'est-à-dire l'élimination des minorités nationales, des minorités ethniques ou religieuses, et je ne parle pas seulement des juifs, des Tunisiens juifs, mais disons que dans les populations d'origine européenne en Tunisie, vous aviez des populations qui étaient bien antérieures à l'époque coloniale, comme une partie des populations italiennes. Les Italiens sont présents en Tunisie. Je lisais un article dans je ne sais plus quel journal où, sur Tabarka, la famille génoise, les Génois à Tabarka sont là depuis le XVIe siècle. Le nom de Porto Farina, par exemple, qui est Manzal Bourguiba aujourd'hui. Non, Samahni, Ghar el-Melh. Porto Farina est un nom qui existe depuis la fin du XVIe siècle. Ce n'est pas un nom colonial, Porto Farina, mais parce que c'était un des principaux ports d'exportation du blé à partir du XVIe siècle. Donc, c'était Ghar el-Melh, Porto Farina, c'était les deux. Bon, et à l'indépendance, on a complètement enlevé le nom de Porto Farina en disant non, ça c'est la colonisation. Bon, ce qui est une erreur historique, en réalité. Bon, donc effectivement, il y a eu un nationalisme qui a été homogénéisateur dans le plus mauvais sens du terme, incontestablement en Tunisie, et la Tunisie n'a pas échappé à cela, et je fais partie de certains historiens qui pensent que dans l'ensemble du monde arabe, je ne parle pas du monde musulman non arabe, qui est un très vaste sujet et tout à fait passionnant d'ailleurs, mais ce n'est pas notre sujet d'aujourd'hui. L'élimination des minorités, qui donc a supprimé pour la majorité de la population le rapport à l'altérité. Et le rapport à l'altérité est quelque chose de fondateur dans une civilisation. C'est pas par hasard d'ailleurs qu'on a remplacé le mot civilisation par le mot culture. On pourrait dire beaucoup de choses là-dessus. Mais cette disparition du rapport à l'altérité locale, pas l'altérité étrangère, l'altérité locale, a laissé libre cours, à mon avis, aux idéologies les plus réactionnaires et les plus conservatrices. Attendez, on va traduire, et puis il y a peut-être d'autres qui peuvent poser des questions.
Okay, so the second question was on nationalism and the idea that obviously there isn't that many big differences between European nationalism and kind of third world nationalism, if not that European powers were obviously involved in imperial projects, so the nationalist frame also takes that imperial aspect, and that in the book there is a differentiation between what is a struggle for national liberation in contrast to what we call nationalism. And the idea that a struggle for national liberation took or did not take kind of a nationalist.
It's not the struggle for national liberation, it's not an ideology. Nationalism is an ideology.
Okay, good. So it's not an ideology, but that what happened in Tunisia and in the rest of the Arab world was that, or Tunisia did not escape a kind of Arab nationalist moment, and that in that sense, this Arab nationalist moment what participated in the erasure and elimination of minorities in the post-independence moment, and not just of kind of for example, a Jewish minority, but also of populations that were here prior to colonization. So the example given is that of the Italians. And the Italians who populated, for example, the city of Tabarka, it's on the Algerian border, and for example, the city of Ghar el-Melh, which is located close to Bizerte, which used to be called Porto Farina, and which was a kind of an Italian settlement since the 16th century. And that kind of, in that post-independence moment, for example, the name Porto Farina was removed and replaced, and that. So in that sense, Tunisia did not escape in the kind of nationalist logic of homogenizing the population that happened within the Arab world, and that this kind of this progressive erasure of minorities kind of alter or change the relation to alterity and to otherness and to the existence of a local otherness that we, or that you think could kind of explain partly or not more reactionary ideologies today.
Thank you.
I have two questions. They are not as sophisticated as those that you have just received. One, from your description...
Excuse me?
No, I have two questions,
Yes.
I said, but they are kind of simple compared to those that we have just heard. So, one is, from your description, it seemed to me that the history of Tunisia was kind of coherent in the sense of how Tunisia was created as a nation, establish itself as a nation. So I would like to ask your opinion on how you explain that the regionalism here is so extreme to a certain extent. And I'm Italian, I thought we were tough on that, but here it's mental from all the jokes and the things that are here. And the second thing is there any historical personality or figure to whom you would compare Nabil Karoui? Thank you.
It's not exactly history, your second question. No, I begin to answer to the second. It's not an answering. It's not. But I think that, and you see the more or less the same thing, in many European countries today, is that when you have periods within the people of disillusions, you have populist candidates who emerge from political life, and the Nabil Karoui is the perfect example of populist, comment on dit, l'émergence, emergence of a populist candidate. But the first question, I prefer to, yes, you have both. It means that, and I insist in my book, it's really one of the main trends in the book of the differences, the cleavage between coast and hinterland, and how this cleavage, what has been the different forms of this cleavage in the successive period of history. So I think this cleavage is very important, and c'est quelque chose de structurant dans l'histoire de la Tunisie. Vraiment de structurant. Et je préfère parler du clivage intérieur-côte que du régionalisme. Of course, there is régionalisme. Le Sahel, les Sfaxiens, enfin, donc, what is interesting that you can have in the same period, in the same movement, the construction of a nation and this kind of cleavage, because you have since the second part of the 19th century a construction of a nation. But as you said, the lady said, this construction of a nation, it was an urban construction, urban construction, a construction by the elites, and a construction by the intellectuals. But during the liberation movement, which the liberation movement was a popular movement. It was not a movement of the elites only. It was a popular movement. The struggle for the national liberation in this country reinforced the idea of a Tunisian nation. The national movement, and not the nationalist movement, but the national movement, reinforced the idea, I am Tunisian. I am Tunisian. So you have in the same period, in the same trends, I can say, the building of the idea of a nation, which is true, and this what you name regionalism, the cleavage, etc. And today, you can find the same thing. If you ask the Tunisian, Tunisian will say, for example, from the la coupe africaine de football, I'm Tunisian against Senegal. Bon. And if you go to Sidi Bouzid, to Gafsa, or Tourdeyev, etc., they say, no, I'm from this place. And I have not the same preoccupation with the people of Sfax or of Sousa of Benzart, for instance. But you have both, I think. It's not that or that. It's that and that.
Thank you very much for your talk and your reflections. I have one short comment to share and one question. Yes. So my
Excuse me.
yeah. So my I'm a bit irritating. So my comment is, I just had this thought: is it perhaps a bit problematic to work on the assumption of a cultivated people?
Okay, so.
You talked of a cultivated population. I mean, in the beginning, oui, les gens cultivés. Et I would like to ask whether it is problematic to work on this assumption, given that you write in French, and is that connected to this notion of peuple cultivé?
Quand j'ai parlé de mon livre, vous voulez dire?
Oui.
Non, ce que je voulais dire, c'est que, ça je peux répondre très vite, c'est que simplement, je ne voulais pas m'adresser seulement à des spécialistes, mais il faut avoir un minimum de connaissances pour lire ce livre. Si on ne connaît rien de l'histoire de la Tunisie, alors je veux la faire découvrir, mais il faut un minimum de repères, voilà, ne serait-ce que ça.
Okay, my question is that if we write a history today, we always, there is the danger of reinterpreting history retrospectively. So it is challenging what you do in your book to do it basically for so many periods of history. And how do you deal with this challenge? I mean, that would be interesting.
Alors, il ne faut pas oublier que depuis que la discipline historique existe, elle n'est jamais qu'un récit. C'est le récit qui fait l'histoire. Et le récit doit être le plus proche possible de la véracité. Je ne parle pas de vérité. Je ne parle jamais de vérité. La vérité, ça n'existe pas. En tout cas en histoire. Mais la véracité, oui. Il se trouve que tel fait a existé. Bon. Donc, nous ne connaissons le fait que par le récit qui en est fait. Ou sinon, nous ne connaîtrions pas le fait. Si il n'y avait pas des stèles qui nous parlaient des pharaons, on ne saurait pas que les pharaons ont existé. Si il n'y avait pas eu des chroniqueurs, on ne saurait pas que telle bataille ou tel fait politique a existé. Donc il ne faut pas oublier ça, que l'histoire, c'est toujours quelque chose qui nous a été raconté. Bon. Maintenant, le travail de l'historien, ce que Marc Bloch appelait le métier d'historien, parce que c'est une discipline, c'est un métier, c'est justement, il ne s'agit pas de réinterpréter l'histoire. Chaque lecture de l'histoire est une interprétation de l'histoire. Il n'y a pas d'autre histoire. Toute lecture de l'histoire est une interprétation de l'histoire. Je prends une plaisanterie. Une plaisanterie. Un Français arrive à Londres et il voit Trafalgar Square, Waterloo Square, et il se demande, mais pourquoi les Anglais donnent à leurs rues et leurs avenues des noms de défaites? Bon. La défaite des uns et la victoire des autres. Bon. Donc toute histoire est une interprétation. Ce qu'on peut essayer de faire, quand on essaye de faire ce que j'appelle, ce que Marc Bloch appelait le métier d'historien, c'est se démarquer. Parce qu'il ne faut pas oublier une autre chose fondamentale, c'est que l'histoire est la discipline la plus idéologisée des sciences humaines. C'est-à-dire que l'histoire sert à la construction du politique, l'histoire sert à la construction de l'idéologie. L'histoire, les nations se construisent en inventant des romans nationaux. Si je prends la France, c'est la même chose, le roman national de Jules Ferry, avec nos ancêtres les Gaulois, que les petits colonisés de ma génération ont appris à l'école. Bon, donc, Donc effectivement, le roman national existe, les romans nationaux. Ce que le métier d'historien, c'est de déconstruire le roman national idéologisé pour une cause politique et essayer de retrouver, d'interpréter ou de réinterpréter, si vous voulez, le terme ne me gêne pas, le terme de réinterpréter, le fait selon des logiques qui soient au moins partiellement débarrassées de leur charge politique et idéologique. Moi, je ne crois pas à l'objectivité totale, je crois à l'impartialité. On parle toujours de quelque chose. Moi, Sophie Bessis, j'ai essayé de faire une histoire impartiale de la Tunisie, mais je parle d'un lieu, je parle d'une période, je parle de mon âge, je suis une personne. Les psychanalystes disent « d'où parles-tu » Et il ne faut pas oublier cette phrase des psychanalystes, « d'où je parle », bien sûr. Mais il y a un devoir d'impartialité que nous devons essayer de respecter, nous autres historiens.
Okay, a terrible response to translate for an anthropologist.
Excuse me for the additional word.
But, okay, I'm panicking.
No, I know that it's difficult. It's the reason why I did answer in French, because I wanted to explain the...
Tease
Yes.
me. But, so it's the idea that the discipline of history is in itself a story. It's a story, not necessarily a story of truth, but rather of véracité, which maybe is truthfulness in history, of looking at facts, but these facts are always told and mediated through specific stories and kind of through specific people reading. So every reading, every historical reading is itself an interpretation. And the joke is a kind of French in London who's looking at different square, Trafalgar, Waterloo, and asking why have they called them at names of defeats, because depending on the perspective you're in, you're either the sort of winner or loser. So kind of this idea of interpretation. And citing a French historian, Bloch, which says that the job of a historian is to kind of think about these national stories, or these stories that have been that have been ideologized or kind of rendered into ideology through, for example, construction of kind of nation state, and with each nation state come a specific historiography and a specific take on history, and kind of deconstructing these national history and deconstructing the ideological charge in them. And the idea is kind of that this is not to render an objective truth, but rather an impartial one, but an impartial one that would account from where you speak, or kind of from where the historian is taking and speaking and kind of formulating his interpretation.
Good.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I think this is the last question.
Okay, c'est bon.
And then we can... Je pourrais pas soigner.
Ah, il y a encore une question, je n'avais pas vu, pardon. Vous allez m'épuiser.
I have a question about the pre-modern period in Tunisia. That's because I work on pre-modern history, and particularly...
What is for you the pre-modern period?
Pre-modern period, I was going to ask a question about the Byzantine, the Roman period. So, I mean, for me, pre-modern is, I mean,
and Middle Ages
like,
too?
for instance, the Ottoman period, like post-Ottoman period would be no longer pre-modern. I wouldn't consider it pre-modern as far as like Tunisian history goes. My question is, so you said that the arrival of Islam, it concerns your intersection of your work with Islamic history, marked a threshold in the history of Tunisia, in the sense that it reoriented Tunisia from kind of like west to east. It gave Tunisia an eastward orientation. I find that a little bit problematic for the following reason. Why not consider the Byzantine Empire, which was ruled from Constantinople.
J'ai pas dit ça exactement, mais c'est pas grave.
Which was ruled from Constantinople and ruled over Syria and Egypt, which today we consider as al-Mashriq. Well, Egypt not so much, but So I'm wondering why not put the mark on the Byzantine period, and instead on the arrival of Islam and the Muslims.
Non, alors, j'ai du mal m'exprimer en anglais, et c'est pour ça que je m'exprime en français là. C'est qu'au contraire, dans l'introduction à mon ouvrage, qui est une introduction essentiellement... Vous comprenez le français? Bon. I'll try to speak English, because I think in the introduction of my book, which introduction is devoted to the historiography, I make a critique very clear of the colonial historiography, speaking of the balancement between West and East. And I say, it's not true, this balancement, because and all the colonial historiography say that progress and modernity comes from West, and tradition comes from East. You are totally right that since the third century after Christ, you have orientalization of the Roman Empire, and it's the reason why Constantine in the 4th century transported the capital of the empire from Rome to Constantinople. So, and this what is named at that period the Roman Empire, l'Empire Romain d'Orient, becomes the Byzantine Empire, of course. So you are totally right. And when you say, coming out from Tunisia, when you see the Umayyad, the first great dynasty, the Arabic dynasty, the Umayyad is a continuation of the Byzantine Empire. Like the Abbasid after is a continuation of the Sassanid Empire of Persia. So this is very important. So it is mainly a critic, I critique this Orient-Occident. But what I wanted to say is that the Arabic conquest till Spain destroyed one thing. It's not Orient-Occident, the homogeneity of the Mediterranean world. So the Mediterranean world from the antiquity, even if Carthage and the Punics are not the Romans, of course, and the Punics ce sont des Orientaux aussi, les Puniques, ils viennent du Liban. Donc il y a toujours eu cette double influence Orient-Occident. But what I wanted to see is that the Mediterranean begins to become an area of exchanges and of conflictuality. So, and Tunisia is taken in this new habitus of exchanges, which always remains, but with conflictuality. But it's not Orient-Occident. Okay?
Thank you very much. This was
Thank
excellent.
you for your attention.
So yeah, we were
Micro.
Need the mics, just yeah. So yeah, thank you to everyone who came.
And thank you to Myriam
for the incredible translations and the thoughtful questions. And great
thanks to you, Professor Bessis, for accepting our invitation first, and for, as I'm concerned, for writing this book.
Merci.
As I said in the beginning, it's not a simple event that a history of a country is written. It's symptomatic of things. I think we've discussed some of these. It's, I think, symptomatic of very positive things that intellectuals do want to see this itinerary as a whole. So thank you very much for doing that. Please keep on the good work on writing and sharing, and you're welcome here as
Thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you.
So there are some logistics. There's water, some juice. Please don't leave before eating the cakes, because we wouldn't know what to do with these cakes. And next week on Monday, we discussed another book, and on Friday too. So on Monday it will be a book by Hedi Ahmed. He's a journalist. It's يوم جاءوا لاعتقالي, the day they came to arrest me. It's more it's about minorities in Tunisia. I think it's important. And then on Wednesday, the book discussed will be Awlad Bourguiba. It's the second part of the history of apostasy accusations in Tunisia. It's by Shukri Mahfoud. And it's also important because it looks at figures. It's like Sophie Bessis did with women. This is a selection of figures. I mean, the link between the figures is hard to establish, but this is where the intrigue is. So this is why you have to come. Thank you, everyone. As I said, please have some refreshment before you leave. Thank you.